Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The desert doesn't care about you. That's the first thing they teach you when you start working the line. It doesn't matter if you're border patrol, if you're trying to cross, if you're lost or found or somewhere in between. The Sonoran Desert will take what it wants, and it won't ask permission first. My name's Axel Montaigne, and I've been working Sector 9 for 2 years now. It's not the busiest stretch of the border. Not like down in Ngala's or over by El Paso, but we get our share of activity. Mostly small groups trying to cross at night. Sometimes smugglers running drugs or people. Occasionally, someone who just got turned around and ended up on the wrong side of the fence without meaning to. Most nights it's routine. You patrol your sector. You check the cameras. You respond to sensor alerts. You go home when your shift ends and you try not to think too much about the things you see out there in the dark most nights. Tonight started normal enough. I was partnered with Clint Haverfield, a veteran agent with 12 years on the job. Clint's the kind of guy who doesn't say much, but when he does talk, you listen. He knows this desert better than anyone I've ever met. Knows where the trails are, where people hide, where the dangerous crossings are. He's saved more lives than he's ever arrested people, though he'd never admit it. We rolled out of the station just after midnight, taking one of the newer Chevy Tahoe out to the western part of our sector. The area's mostly empty desert. Creosote bush and holla cactus stretching out as far as you can see in the daylight. At night, it's just darkness and the occasional glow of our headlights catching something reflective. A piece of trash, a marker, eyes of an animal watching us pass. The temperature had dropped to the low 50s, which sounds warm if you're not from here, but in the desert at night, that kind of cold settles into your bones. There's no moisture to hold the heat, so it just bleeds away into the sky, leaving everything sharp and brittle feeling. We were about 40 minutes into our patrol when Clint pulled over onto a dirt track that led up to a small rise. It's one of our regular observation points. Gives you a good view of about 3 mi of border fence and the approaches on the Mexican side. Going to do a thermal sweep, Clint said, reaching for the camera in the back seat. I nodded and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and total. No wind tonight, no insects, nothing. Just that heavy desert quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. Clint got out, and I followed both of us moving around to the front of the Tahoe where he could set up the thermal camera on the hood. The device is about the size of a small video camera. Displays heat signatures in shades of green and white on a small screen. We use it to spot people moving through the desert at night since body heat shows up clear against the cold ground. He powered it on and started panning slowly across the landscape, moving from left to right, covering our entire field of view. I watched the screen over his shoulder, mostly just empty desert, cold and dark. A few small signatures that were probably rabbits or coyotes, nothing human-sized. Quiet tonight, I said. Give it time, Clint replied, not looking away from the screen. That's when I saw it. Just for a second in the far right edge of the display, a vertical heat signature, definitely human-sized, maybe 200 YD out. It was there, bright and clear, and then it was gone. Wait, I said. Go back. Right side about 200. Clint panned back slower this time. We both stared at the screen. Nothing, just cold desert. I saw something, I said. A person, I think, standing out there. Where exactly? I pointed at the screen, right about there. It was clear as day for maybe a second, then it just disappeared. Clint adjusted the focus, increased the gain on the camera. Still nothing. He lowered the camera and looked out at the desert with his naked eyes, then raised it again and scanned the area once more. Equipment glitch, maybe, he said, but his voice had that careful tone he gets when something doesn't add up. Yeah, maybe. We stood there for another few minutes watching the screen, looking for any sign of movement. The desert remained empty, cold, and still. Finally, Clint packed up the camera and we got back in the Tahoe. As we pulled away from the observation point, our radio crackled to life. "All units, Sector 9, this is dispatch. Be advised we're getting some interference on the repeater tonight. If you experience communication difficulties, switch to Channel 7. Clint picked up the handset. "Dispatch, this is Havfield. Copy that. Any idea what's causing the interference?" Static filled the cab for a moment. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, broken up and hard to understand. "Negative, Havfield, technician, look at it. Morning, just aware, 104, dispatch." He hung up the handset and glanced at me. "You catch all that? Something about a technician looking at it in the morning." "Yeah," he shifted in his seat, eyes on the road ahead. "Radio's been weird out here lately. Past couple weeks we get interference around the same time every night." "What time?" "Right around 3:00 a.m. I checked my watch. It was 2:47. We continued our patrol, following the fence line, checking the access roads and known crossing points. Everything seemed normal. The fence was intact. No fresh tracks in the dirt. No signs of recent activity, just the empty desert and that persistent silence. At 258, we stopped at another observation point. This one lowered down closer to the fence. Clint wanted to check one of the drainage areas where we sometimes find people waiting for pickup after they cross. I stayed with the vehicle while he walked down to look, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I leaned against the hood of the Tahoe, looking up at the stars. Out here, away from any cities, the night sky is incredible. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, and you can see satellites moving slowly across the darkness, and shooting stars are common enough that you stop making wishes after the first few. But tonight, the stars seemed dimmer somehow, like there was a haze between me and them, even though the air was perfectly clear. That's when the radio started acting up. It began with static, the normal crackling you get sometimes when the signal is weak. But then underneath the static, I heard something else. A voice maybe too distorted to make out words, just a rhythmic pattern of sound that might have been human speech. I reached through the open window and turned up the volume. The static got louder, but so did that underlying pattern. It almost sounded like someone counting, slow and deliberate. One syllable, pause, another syllable, pause, over and over. I checked my watch. Exactly 3:00 a.m. The pattern continued for maybe 30 seconds, and then it cut off abruptly. The radio went completely silent, not even static, just dead air. I was about to call out to Clint when the radio crackled back to life. Normal static this time, and then the dispatcher's voice clear as a bell. "All units, Sector 9 radio test. Please respond if you can hear this transmission." I grabbed the handset. "Dispatch, this is Montoyer. I read you loud and clear. 10-4 Montoyer. We had a complete signal loss for about 30 seconds. Everything good on your end?" "Yeah, everything's fine. We heard the interference. Sounded almost like someone counting or something. A long pause, counting." "Yeah, or maybe I'm wrong. It was pretty garbled. Copy that. We'll have the tech look into it." "Dispatch, clear." Clint came walking back up from the drainage area, shaking his head. "Nothing down there, dry as bone." "Radio just went weird again," I said, right at 3. He glanced at his watch, then at me. "What did you hear?" "Static and something underneath it, almost like a voice." He didn't say anything, just stood there looking out at the desert. His jaw was tight, and I could see him working through something in his mind. "This has happened before, hasn't it?" I asked. "The interference at 3:00 a.m., yeah, every night. Past 12 nights, yeah, same time, same kind of pattern in the static. Did you report it?" "Of course I did." They said it was probably some kind of atmospheric thing, or maybe someone running illegal radio transmitter on the Mexican side. He paused, "But it doesn't feel right." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, still looking out at the darkness. "You ever get the feeling something's watching you? Like you can't see it or hear it, but you know it's there sometimes. I get that feeling every night around 3, right when the radio starts acting up." He turned to look at me. And twice now I've seen something on the thermal camera. Same thing you saw tonight. Human-sized signature there for just a second, then gone. Both times it was right at 3:00 a.m. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. You think someone's out there? I think something's out there. Whether it's a person or not, I don't know. We stood there in silence for a while. Both of us scanning the desert, seeing nothing but darkness and the distant glow of the fence light strung out along the border like a necklace of small moons. "Come on," Clint finally said. "Let's keep moving. Standing still out here makes me nervous tonight." We got back in the Tahoe and continued our patrol. The next hour passed without incident. We checked 3 more observation points, responded to a sensor alert that turned out to be a coyote, and did a vehicle inspection at one of the access gates. Everything was routine, normal, exactly what you'd expect on a quiet night in the desert. But the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling Clint had mentioned, that sense of being watched. It was like an itch between my shoulder blades, a persistent awareness of something just outside my peripheral vision. At 4:15, we were heading back toward the station when Clint suddenly pulled over. "What is it?" I asked. He was staring at something ahead of us on the road. I followed his gaze and saw it too. Footprints in the dust crossing from the south side of the road to the north. Fresh prints, maybe an hour old at most. The tread pattern was clear in our headlights. "Hiking boots," Clint said, size 10 or 11. We got out and examined the tracks more closely. They came from the direction of the fence across the road and continued north into the open desert. A single set of prints walking at a normal pace, no signs of running or hesitation. "Could be someone who crossed earlier tonight," I said before we started our patrol. Maybe Clint knelt down next to one of the prints studying it, but look at this. I crouched beside him. He was pointing at the depth of the impression. This print is deeper at the heel than at the toe. Whoever made this was walking backward. I looked at the line of tracks again. He was right. The person who made these prints had been walking backward away from the fence deeper into the desert. "That doesn't make any sense," I said. "No, it doesn't." We followed the tracks for about 50 yards. They continued in a straight line, perfectly evenly spaced, still backward. Then they just stopped. Not faded out, not scattered like the person had started running. They just ended like whoever had been making them had simply ceased to exist mid-step. Clint and I stood there looking at the last footprint, looking at the empty desert beyond it, trying to find some rational explanation for what we were seeing. "Could be a hoax," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Someone messing with us. Who? And why walk backward into the middle of nowhere just to mess with Border Patrol?" He had a point. We were miles from any roads besides our patrol route, miles from any towns or settlements. There was no reason for anyone to be out here, and certainly no reason to walk backward into the desert until your footprints mysteriously ended. "We should call it in," I said. Clint nodded, but before he could reach for his radio, we both heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere ahead of us in the darkness. It sounded like metal scraping against metal, like the border fence being cut. We both froze, listening. The sound came again, rhythmic and deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Clint pulled out his flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating creosote bushes and rocky ground, but no fence. We were too far north to see it from here. "Could be smugglers," he said quietly, "cutting through. Should we approach?" "Yeah, but careful. Stay behind me. And if I tell you to get back to the truck, you run. Understand?" I nodded, pulling out my own flashlight. We moved forward slowly, following the direction of the sound. The scraping continued, steady and methodical. It didn't sound frantic or rushed, just patient and persistent. As we walked, I became aware of something else. The temperature was dropping. I could see my breath now, which shouldn't have been possible. Even on cold desert nights, it rarely gets cold enough for that. But with each step forward, the air grew colder until I was shivering inside my uniform. "You feel that?" I whispered to Clint. "Yeah." The scraping sound was louder now, closer. We should have been able to see the fence by this point. Should have been able to see whoever was cutting through it. but all our flashlights showed was empty desert. And then suddenly the sound stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds of traffic or civilization, just nothing. And in that nothing, I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. "Hello," Clint called out, his voice carrying across the desert. "Border Patrol, show yourself." No response, no movement, just that terrible silence. He swept his flashlight back and forth, covering the area where the sound had been coming from. I did the same with mine, our beams crossing and recrossing the darkness. That's when I saw it. About 30 yards ahead, standing perfectly still, was a figure. It was tall, roughly human-shaped, but something about its proportions seemed off. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be. The head was tilted at an angle that didn't look natural. "Clint," I whispered, pointing. He swung his light toward it. For just a moment, the beam caught the figure full in, and I saw it clearly. It was wearing what looked like old clothes, desert faded and torn. The face was in shadow, or maybe there was no face at all. I couldn't tell, but I could see that it was looking at us, or at least oriented in our direction. "Border Patrol," Clint shouted again. "Stay where you are. Put your hands where I can see them." The figure didn't move, didn't comply, didn't run, didn't react in any way. It just stood there impossibly still, arms hanging like lengths of rope. Clint started walking toward it, and I followed, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run the other direction. We closed the distance to maybe 20 yards, then 15. That's when the figure moved. Not the way a person moves, with weight shifting and joints bending. It glided sideways, smooth and continuous like it was on rails. No footsteps, no sound, just lateral movement that covered maybe 10 FT in less than a second. "What the hell?" Clint breathed. I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but watch as the figure moved again, this time in a different direction. Another smooth glide, another impossible motion. Clint raised his radio. "Dispatch, this is Havfield. We have a situation out here." Unknown individual displaying erratic behavior, requesting backup. Static filled the air. No response from dispatch, just that familiar crackling that we'd been hearing all night. He tried again. "Dispatch, do you copy? This is Havfield requesting immediate backup." More static, and then underneath it, that rhythmic pattern again. The same sounds we'd heard at 3:00 a.m., only louder now, more distinct. And this time I could make out what it was. Numbers. Someone was counting backward in span. "Tra vent vento. 30, 29, 28. The voice was wrong, too flat, no emotion, no inflection, just numbers recited in a mechanical tone. I looked at Clint. His face had gone pale in the flashlight beam. The figure moved again, closer this time, close enough that I could see details. The clothes weren't just faded. They were rotted, falling apart at the seams, stained with something dark. And where the face should be, there was just shadow. Deep, impenetrable shadow that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. "Venticate Venties, vintage 27, 26, 25. We need to go," I said. Now Clint didn't argue. We both started backing away, keeping our lights on the figure. It didn't follow, just stood there swaying slightly like a tree in a breeze that didn't exist. Venti quattro, ventris ventidos. We made it back to the Tahoe faster than I thought possible. Clint started the engine and we pulled out, tires kicking up dust. I kept my eyes on the side mirror, watching the darkness behind us. For just a moment I thought I saw something in the distance. A tall shape standing in the middle of the road, arms hanging at wrong angles. Then we rounded a curve and it was gone. The radio crackled back to life. "Havfield, this is dispatch. We copy your request for backup. What's your location?" Clint grabbed the handset. "Dispatch, we're heading back to station." "Cancel that backup request." "Say again." "You requested immediate assistance." "I know what I requested. Cancel it. Everything's under control. We'll file a report when we get back." 104 H Field. Dispatch clear. He hung up and we drove in silence. Neither of us wanted to talk about what we'd just seen. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge it. When we got back to the station, we filed our reports. Clint wrote about the footprints and the sound we'd heard, but he left out the figure. I did the same. There are some things you can't put in an official report without sounding crazy, and a tall, shadow-faced thing gliding through the desert while a disembodied voice counts backward definitely fell into that category. Before we clocked out, Clint pulled me aside. "Listen," he said, "what we saw tonight, I know. I've been doing this job for 12 years and I've never seen anything like that. Never. Do you think it was real?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I think something's out there, and I think it wants us to know it's there. Why, I don't know, but Montwar, if you're smart, you'll request a transfer, get away from Sector 9. What about you? I've been here too long. Whatever that thing is, it knows me. I can feel it." He put his hand on my shoulder, "But you still have a chance to walk away." I went home that morning thinking about what he'd said, thinking about transferring, about getting away from the desert and whatever was living in it. But by the time the sun came up, I'd convinced myself it had been some kind of shared hallucination. Heat exhaustion maybe, or carbon monoxide in the Tahoe, something rational, something explainable. I reported for my next shift 2 days later. Clint wasn't there. The station commander said he'd called in sick. When I tried to reach him on his cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. He never came back to work. 2 weeks later, they found his truck on the side of the road near that same observation point where we'd seen the figure. Engine running, lights on, driver's door open. No sign of Clint, no footprints leading away, no evidence of foul play. He was just gone. They searched for 3 days. Dogs, helicopters, ground teams covering miles of desert. Nothing. It was like he'd evaporated into the night air. I should have requested that transfer then. Should have gotten as far away from Sector 9 as possible. But I didn't. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was something else. A feeling that if I left, I'd never understand what happened to Clint. So I kept working the sector, kept doing the patrols, checking the cameras, responding to sensor alerts, and every night at 3:00 a.m. the radio started acting up, static, and underneath it, that voice counting backward in Spanish. Sometimes I see things on the thermal camera, human-shaped signatures that disappear when I get close. Sometimes I find footprints that go backward and end in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes I hear metal scraping against metal, even though the fence is intact. And sometimes late at night when I'm alone in the desert, I feel like I'm being watched. Like something is out there in the darkness, patient and persistent, waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. But I think about what Clint said about how it knew him, about how it wanted us to know it was there. I think it's counting down to something, getting closer with each passing night, each set of backward footprints, each impossible figure glimpsed in the thermal camera. 30-29-28. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I don't think I want to find out, but I have a feeling I'm going to whether I want to or not. Because whatever's out there in Sector 9, whatever took Clint Havfield and left nothing but an empty truck with its engine running, it's not done yet. And last night, when the radio started its static at 3:00 a.m., when that flat mechanical voice began counting backward, I heard something new underneath the Spanish. My name, Rafe, just once. Barely audible beneath the numbers, but clear enough. Rafe, the thing in the desert knows who I am now. And I think that means my time is running out. I've been working the sensor grid for 4 years now, and I can tell you the technology isn't magic. It's just circuits and software and electromagnetic fields doing exactly what they're programmed to do. When a sensor triggers, there's always a reason. Heat signature, motion, pressure, something physical and measurable crossing into its detection range. That's the whole point. My name is Marceline Crowder, and I monitor the remote sensor network for Sector 11, a stretch of the Arizona border that's mostly empty desert and rock formations too rough for regular vehicle patrols. We've got about 300 sensors scattered across 60 m, buried in the ground or hidden in rocks. Each one programmed to detect movement and transmit an alert to our station when something crosses its field. Could be a person. Could be a pack of javelina, could be a coyote or a deer. Our job is to figure out which and respond accordingly. Most of the time it's animals. Maybe 70% of our alerts are wildlife. Another 20% are weather-related dust storms or heavy rain messing with the sensors. The remaining 10% that's actual human activity. People crossing illegally, smugglers, occasionally just hikers who wandered too close to the border without realizing. The system works. It's not perfect, but it works. Sensors trigger, we check them. We respond if needed, and we maintain the equipment. Simple, predictable until it's not. It started 3 weeks ago. Sensor 247 located about 8 miles northeast of our station in a rocky area we call the Breaks. It's not a height traffic zone, too remote and too difficult to cross without proper equipment. We get maybe 1 or 2 alerts from that sensor per month, usually wildlife. But 3 weeks ago, sensor 247 started triggering every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. first night. I was on duty alone. The alert came through like normal. A small chime on my computer and a red indicator showing which sensor had been activated. I pulled up the data. Single contact moving south to north, crossing the sensor field at a normal walking pace. Estimated size, human. I logged it and then called it into the patrol units. They were 40 minutes out, so by the time they got there, whoever had triggered the sensor would be long gone. Still, procedure is procedure. You respond to every alert. The patrol found nothing. No tracks, no signs of recent activity, just empty desert and rocks. They checked the sensor itself, made sure it wasn't damaged or malfunctioning. Everything tested normal. They marked it as a false positive and moved on. Next night, same thing. Sensor 247 at 3:17 a.m., same data signature, single contact, human-sized, moving south to north. Patrol responded again, found nothing again. This time they did a wider search, covering about a 4-mile radius around the sensor. Still nothing. Third night, I called Dixon Sally, our remote sensor tech. Asked him to come in and look at the data. Dixon's been maintaining these sensors for 8 years. If something's wrong with the equipment, he'll know. He arrived around 2:00 in the morning, grabbed a coffee from the break room, and sat down at my terminal. We pulled up the logs for sensor 247, going back 6 months. Before 3 weeks ago, the sensor had triggered maybe 12 times total. All normal wildlife patterns, all different times of day and night. And it's been every night for 3 weeks, Dixon asked. Every night, same time, same signature. He frowned at the screen, scrolling through the data. Same exact time, like down to the minute, down to the second, 317:04 a.m. That's weird. Yeah. He pulled up the technical specifications for sensor 247, checked its power levels, signal strength, and calibration data. Everything looked normal. The sensor was functioning exactly as designed. Could be someone messing with us, he said. Figured out where the sensor is, walks past it every night at the same time just to see how we'll react for 3 weeks straight. People are weird, Crowder. You know that. I did know that. But something about this didn't feel like a prank. It felt like something else. At 3:17 a.m., right on schedule, the alert came through. Dixon and I both watched the data populate on screen. Single contact, human-sized south to north walking pace, identical to every other night. Okay, Dixon said, standing up. I'm going out there. I want to see this for myself. Now, why not? If it's triggering at the same time every night, maybe I can catch whoever's doing it. I wanted to tell him that was a bad idea. Wanted to say that going out to the Breaks alone at 3:00 in the morning to confront an unknown contact wasn't smart. But Dixon was his own person. And besides, he was probably right. It was probably just someone messing with us. I'm coming with you, I said. We took one of the utility trucks loaded with the sensor equipment and repair tools in case we needed them. The drive out to the Breaks took about 25 minutes. Rough dirt roads that turned to barely their tracks as you got deeper into the desert. The sensor was planted in a small wash between 2 rock formations. It's a natural corridor, the kind of place people use to move through difficult terrain. The sensor itself was buried about 6 in down, covered with dirt and rocks to camouflage it. You'd never know it was there unless you were looking for it. We parked about a 100-yard away and walked in, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was cold, probably mid-40s, and absolutely still. No wind, no sound except our boots on the rocky ground. Dixon checked the sensor location with his GPS, then knelt down and started carefully excavating around it. The sensor was a black cylinder about the size of a coffee can with a small antenna protruding from one end. He pulled out a diagnostic tool and connected it to the sensor's access port. "Signal's clean," he said, reading the display. "Batteries at 87%. Calibration is within normal parameters. This thing is working perfectly. So why is it triggering every night? Because something's walking past it every night." He stood up, shining his flashlight around the wash. "Let's look for tracks." We searched the area methodically, covering the wash in both approaches. The ground was mostly rock and hard pan, not great for leaving prints. But after about 15 minutes, I found something. "Over here," I called. Dixon came over and looked where I was pointing. There in a small patch of soft dirt at the edge of the wash were footprints, boot prints. Looked like hiking boots or work boots, a size 10 or 11. They were fresh, couldn't have been more than a few hours old. We followed them. The prints led north through the wash, exactly following the sensor's detection path. They were evenly spaced, normal walking stride. Whoever made them had been moving at a steady pace, not running or hesitating. About 50 yards from the sensor, the prints reached another patch of soft ground. We could see them clearly in our flashlights, each impression detailed enough to make out the tread pattern. And then they just stopped. Not faded out, not turned off onto rockier ground. The prints ended mid-stride, like whoever had been walking had simply ceased to exist between one step and the next. The left boot print was clear and deep. Where the right boot should have landed, there was nothing, just undisturbed dirt. Dixon and I stood there looking at that impossible ending, trying to make sense of it. Could the wind have filled in the rest? I asked, knowing it was a stupid question even as I said it. There was no wind. And besides, you can tell the difference between a print that's been erased and ground that's never been disturbed. "No," Dixon said quietly. "Look at this." He was kneeling by the last print, running his fingers along the edge. "This is fresh. Maybe an hour old, maybe less. And the ground past it hasn't been touched. No scuff marks, no partial prints, nothing." I pulled out my phone and took pictures, the prints leading up to that final spot, the last clear impression, and the empty ground beyond. Evidence of something impossible. "What do you think happened?" I asked. Dixon stood up, brushing dirt off his hands. His face and the flashlight beam looked troubled. "I think we should get back to the truck. But now, Crowder, I don't like this." We walked back to the truck quickly, both of us keeping our flashlights moving, scanning the darkness around us. The desert had felt empty when we arrived. Now it felt crowded, like there were things watching us from behind the rocks, things we couldn't see but could somehow sense. We got in the truck and Dixon started the engine immediately, not bothering with his usual pre-drive checklist. As we pulled away from the brakes, I looked back through the rear window. For just a moment, I thought I saw something standing in the wash where we'd found the prints. A tall figure, motionless, watching us leave. I blinked and it was gone. When we got back to the station, Dixon downloaded the diagnostic data from the sensor and spent an hour going through it line by line. I made fresh coffee and tried not to think about those footprints ending in midair. Tried not to think about that shape I'd seen in the wash. "The sensor's fine," Dixon finally said, closing his laptop. "It's detecting exactly what it's supposed to detect. Something human-sized walking past at 3:17 a.m., but the footprints I know," he rubbed his eyes. "I know, and I don't have an explanation for that, but the sensor is doing its job. Whatever's triggering it, it's real, it's physical. It has mass and heat signature, and it moves through space like anything else. So what do? We keep monitoring, document everything, and maybe we get some backup next time before we go out there at night." I agreed with that plan. So the next night when sensor 247 triggered at 3:17 a.m., I didn't go out to investigate. I just logged it, noted the data signature, and let it sit. Same thing the night after that and the night after that. But on the sixth night, something changed. The alert came through at 3:17 a.m. as usual. Single contact, human-sized, south to north. But this time the sensor didn't clear like it normally did. Usually once the contact passes through the detection field, the sensor resets and the alert goes dormant. This time it stayed active. The contact had stopped moving. I pulled up the real-time data. The heat signature was stationary, positioned right at the center of the sensor's field, like whoever or whatever it was had walked to that exact spot and just stood there. I watched the screen for 10 minutes. No movement. The signature remained steady. Not even the normal small movements you get from a person breathing or shifting their weight, just perfectly still. I called Dixon. He was off duty at home, but he answered on the second ring. I stopped moving, I said. The contact, it's just standing there. How long? 10 minutes so far, a silence on the other end. Then I'm coming in, don't do anything until I get there. He arrived 30 minutes later with Tova Burnell, one of our field medics. Tova's trained in wilderness medicine, and she's been on enough remote calls to know how to handle herself in difficult situations. If we were going back out to the breaks, having a medic along seemed smart. The three of us sat at my terminal, watching the sensor data. The contact was still there, still motionless. It had been standing in the same spot for almost an hour now. Maybe it's injured, Tova suggested. Someone who collapsed or got hurt and can't move for an hour without falling over. Dixon shook his head. You'd see movement swaying at least. This thing is dead still. Then what is it? None of us had an answer to that. At 4:00 a.m., we decided to go out there. The contact was still stationary, and if there was even a chance it was a person in medical distress, we had a duty to respond. Tova loaded her medical kit into the truck while Dixon grabbed extra batteries for the flashlights and his diagnostic equipment. The drive out felt longer this time. Maybe because we knew something was out there waiting. Maybe because the darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. The headlights cut through the night but didn't seem to illuminate much, like the light was being swallowed by the desert. We parked in the same spot as before and approached the wash on foot. 3 flashlight beams sweeping through the darkness, looking for the stationary contact that had been standing there for over an hour. The wash was empty. We walked to the sensor location, checked the exact coordinates where the data said the contact should be. Nothing. No person, no animal, no anything. Just rocks and dirt and that persistent desert silence. Dixon pulled out his diagnostic tool and checked the sensor. Still active, still registering a heat signature at these exact coordinates. It says there's something right here, he said, tapping the screen, right where we're standing. Tova swept the area with her flashlight again. I don't see anything. Neither do I said, but the sensor does. We spread out, searching the immediate area, looking for any sign of what might be triggering the sensor. What might have been standing here for the past hour? Tova found the footprints first. Over here, she called. They were in the same patch of soft ground as before. Fresh boot prints, same tread pattern, same size. They came from the south, walked to the center of the wash, and stopped. But this time there were more of them, lots more. The prints overlapped each other like whoever had made them had walked to this spot multiple times. Dozens of times, maybe more, all leading to the same end point, all stopping at the same place. Layer upon layer of footprints, some so fresh you could see individual pebbles in the tread marks, others older and partially worn away. How many times has it been here? Tova asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks, I said. Every night for 3 weeks. Dixon was at the edge of the print cluster, kneeling down. Look at this. We joined him. He was pointing at one of the clearest prints, a perfect impression of a right boot, but something was wrong with it. The print was too deep at the heel, and the toe barely made an impression, like the weight distribution was backward. They're all like that, he said, moving his flashlight from print to print. Every single one. Whoever's making these is walking backward. I thought about the first night when we'd found the prints ending mid-stride. I'd assumed we were looking at someone walking north away from the border, but if they were walking backward, that meant they were facing south, looking back toward Mexico while walking deeper into the United States. Why would someone walk backward through the desert? Tova asked. To watch something, Dixon said. To keep an eye on something behind them or to make sure something doesn't follow them, I added. We all looked back toward the south, toward Mexico, toward whatever these backward prints might be fleeing from. The desert looked the same as always, empty, dark, silent. But now it felt different. Felt like there might be something out there in that darkness, something worth walking backward to keep in sight. The sensor data on Dixon's tool suddenly changed. The contact was moving again, not north like before, but east, parallel to the border. We could see it on the screen, the heat signature sliding across the grid at a walking pace. It's leaving, Dixon said. We tracked it on the screen, watching it move out of sensor 247's range and into the coverage area of sensor 251, about half a mile east. When it crossed into that sensor's field, we got another alert at the station. I could see it pop up on my phone, the automated notification that sensor 251 had been triggered. The signature continued east, moving from sensor to sensor. 2M51, then 2M55, then 262, each one triggering in sequence as the contact passed through. We stood there in the wash, watching it progress on the screen. This invisible thing walking through the desert, detectable only by our buried sensors. At 4:17 a.m., exactly 1 hour after it had first appeared, the contact vanished. It was in the middle of sensor 266's detection field one moment, and then it was just gone. The sensor cleared, the alert went dormant, and our screens showed nothing but empty desert. We drove back to the station in silence. None of us wanted to talk about what we'd seen, or rather what we hadn't seen. Physical evidence of something walking through the desert, something that showed up on sensors and left footprints, but that remained completely invisible to the human eye. Over the next week, I documented everything. The exact time of each alert, the pattern of movement, the sensor data. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the contact appeared at sensor 247. Every night it stood there for varying amounts of time. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. And then it would move, always east, always following the same route through our sensor grid until it disappeared exactly 1 hour after it first appeared. The footprints accumulated each night, left new layers in that same patch of soft ground, all backward, all leading to the same spot. I took measurements, made plaster casts, photographed them from every angle. The prints were real, physical, undeniable. Something was out there. Dixon researched the area looking for any history that might explain what we were experiencing. He found some interesting things. The breaks used to be a crossing point back in the 80s and 90s before we had the sensor grid. It was known for being dangerous. Lots of people died out there from exposure or dehydration. There were stories of border crossers getting lost in the rocks, wandering in circles until they collapsed. One story in particular caught his attention. In 1987, a group of 6 people had attempted to cross through the breaks at night. Only 5 made it. The 6th, a man named Rigoberto Salazar, had become separated from the group. They'd searched for him for hours, but eventually had to keep moving or risk dying themselves. His body was never found. The survivor accounts all mentioned the same detail. They said Rigoberto had been walking backward for the last part of their journey. He'd insisted on watching their back trail. Said he felt like something was following them. The others thought he was being paranoid, suffering from heat stroke maybe. But he wouldn't turn around, wouldn't stop watching whatever he thought was behind them. And then sometime during the night he disappeared. One moment he was there walking backward, keeping watch. The next moment he was gone. The group had been in rough terrain, lots of rocks and washes. They'd assumed he'd fallen or gotten separated in the darkness, but they never found him, never heard him call out, never found any sign of what had happened to him. Dixon showed me the records, the old Border Patrol reports and witness statements. Rigoberto Salazar, missing since October 1987, last seen walking backward through the breaks, watching for something the others couldn't see. I pulled up our sensor data. October 1987 was 37 years ago. Our sensor grid had only been installed 4 years ago, but I wondered if we'd had sensors back then, if they would have detected something walking through the breaks every night at 3:17 a.m., something human-sized, moving south to north, leaving backward footprints that ended in mid-stride. "You think it's him?" I asked Dixon. "You think it's Salazar still out there, still walking?" "I think something's out there. Whether it's him or something else, I don't know." 3 nights ago, I decided to do something stupid. I went out to the breaks alone, timed to arrive at 3:17 a.m. to be there when the contact appeared. I wanted to see it for myself, whatever it was, wanted to understand. I parked the truck and walked to the wash, carrying just a flashlight and my phone with the sensor app open. The desert was quiet, cold, empty. I stood at the spot where all those footprints accumulated, where the backward tracks ended, and I waited. At 3:17 a.m., my phone chimed. Sensor 247 active, contact detected. I was standing right in the sensor field. If there was something here, I should be able to see it, hear it, feel it. But there was nothing. Just me and the darkness and that cold desert air. I looked down at my phone. The sensor data showed 2 signatures. One was me standing still, watching my screen. The other was right next to me, so close we were almost overlapping on the grid. Something was standing next to me. I could feel it now, a presence I hadn't noticed before. A cold spot in the air to my left, colder than the surrounding night. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight toward it. Nothing, empty air, but the cold was real and the sensor didn't lie. Something was there. "Hello," I said quietly, feeling ridiculous for talking to empty air. The cold spot moved. I could track it by the temperature change, by the way. My breath suddenly became visible in a space where it hadn't been a moment before. It was circling me slowly, staying just at the edge of my flashlight beam. I stood perfectly still, letting it move, trying not to panic. On my phone, I could see the second signature moving around mine. Close but not touching, like it was examining me, trying to decide what I was, and then it stopped directly in front of me. I raised my flashlight, pointed it at where the signature should be. For just a moment, less than a second, I saw something. Not a clear image, more like a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from the pavement. The shape was roughly human, tall and thin, with arms that hung too long. Then it was gone and the cold spot with it. The sensor data showed the contact moving east, heading for sensor 251, continuing its nightly route. I stood there shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization of what I'd seen, or almost seen. Something was walking through our sensor grid every night. Something that had been walking the same route for 3 weeks, maybe longer, maybe 37 years. Something that left footprints and triggered sensors and existed just at the edge of what our technology could detect. I drove back to the station and wrote up my report. I included everything. The footprints, the sensor data, the historical research about Rigoberto Salazar, what I'd experienced that night. I sent it to our sector chief, recommended that we do a more thorough investigation, maybe bring in some experts to analyze the phenomenon. The response came back the next day. My report had been filed under equipment malfunction, and the recommendation was to replace sensor 247. Dixon was scheduled to go out and swap it for a new unit. I tried to argue, tried to explain that this wasn't a malfunction, that something real and measurable was happening out there, but nobody wanted to hear it. As far as the official record was concerned, sensor 247 was faulty and would be replaced. Dixon did the replacement 2 days ago, pulled out the old sensor, installed a new one, tested it to make sure it was working properly. The new sensor is functioning perfectly. No false alarms, no anomalous readings. But last night at 3:17 a.m. it triggered. Same data signature, same pattern. Single contact, human-sized, south to north. And this morning, Dixon went out to check. The footprints are still there, still accumulating in that patch of soft ground, still backward, still ending in mid-stride, still fresh. Whatever's walking through the breaks, it doesn't care that we replace the sensor. It's going to keep walking its route, keep triggering our alerts, keep leaving its backward tracks in the dirt. And I think I know why it walks backward. Now I think Dixon was right. It's watching something, making sure something doesn't follow it. Because whatever Roberto Salazar saw behind him that night in 1987, whatever made him refuse to turn around, whatever made him disappear while walking backward into the desert, it's still out there. And maybe, just maybe, the only thing keeping it from crossing that invisible line into our world is one man dead for 37 years, still walking backward, still keeping watch, still standing guard at 3:17 every morning. The sensor will keep triggering. The footprints will keep accumulating. And whatever is out there in the darkness behind Roberto Salazar will keep pressing at the edges of our detection grid looking for a way through. I just hope he never stops walking. I hope he never turns around. Because I think if he does, if he finally gives up his backward vigil, whatever he's been watching all these years will follow him through. And then our sensors will detect something else. Something we won't want to see, even as a distortion in the air, even for less than a second. Something I hope stays on the other side of that invisible line forever. There are places along the border that don't feel right. You can't explain it to someone who hasn't been there. Can't make them understand that certain stretches of fence or certain patches of desert just feel wrong in a way that has nothing to do with danger or difficulty. It's deeper than that, more primitive, like some part of your brain that's older than language is screaming at you to leave, to get away, to not look back. Devil's Canyon is one of those places. My name is Lane Carridge, and I've been working Border Patrol for 6 years. The last 3 in Sector 14, which includes a 10-mi stretch of some of the roughest terrain in southern New Mexico. Most of it is accessible only on foot or by ATV. Lots of rocky desert, dry washes, and one significant geographic feature, Devil's Canyon. The canyon runs roughly north-south, cutting across the border about halfway through our sector. It's not particularly wide, maybe 100 ft across at the rim, but it's deep, drops down about 200 ft in some places. The bottom is rocky and dry most of the year with occasional pools of standing water after heavy rains. Steep walls on both sides, mostly smooth rock with a few outcroppings and ledges. It's a natural corridor for people trying to cross. The canyon provides shelter from the sun during the day, concealment from aerial surveillance, and a clear path north that's easier to navigate than the open desert. We patrol it regular, usually once per shift, checking for signs of activity. The canyon has a reputation, though. The older agents, the ones who have been working this sector for 10 or 15 years, they don't like going down there. They'll check the rim, scan it with binoculars, maybe do a vehicle patrol along the top edge, but they won't descend into the canyon itself unless they absolutely have to. When I asked why, I got vague answers. Bad acoustics, one guy said. Sound does weird things down there. Another told me it was just an unpleasant place. Lots of sharp rocks, easy to roll an ankle, not worth the risk unless you're tracking someone specific. But I could see it in their eyes. They were spooked by something they didn't want to talk about. I'd been in Devil's Canyon maybe a dozen times during my first year in Sector 14. Never had any problems. Never experienced anything unusual. It was just a canyon, dry and rocky and hot during the day, cold and dark at night. The acoustics were strange. Yeah, sounds echoed in odd ways, sometimes seeming to come from the wrong direction, but that was just geology, the way the rock formations reflected sound waves. Nothing supernatural about it. Then I heard the voice. It was a Tuesday night in late September about 3 weeks ago. I was paired with Reese Tatlow, who handles communications for our sector. Ree is good at her job, knows the radio systems inside and out, can usually find a signal even in the dead zones where the terrain blocks normal transmission. We were doing a routine patrol of the canyon rim, checking for fresh tracks or any signs of recent crossings. It was around midnight. Temperature had dropped to the low 60s and there was no moon, just darkness and stars and the black void of the canyon dropping away to our right. We'd been driving for about 20 minutes when Ree suddenly told me to stop. "You hear that?" she asked. I killed the engine and we both sat there listening. At first, I didn't hear anything except the normal desert night sounds. Some distant coyotes, the faint rustle of wind through the sparse vegetation. Then I heard it, a voice faint, coming from somewhere down in the canyon. It sounded like someone calling out, but I couldn't make out the words. Just the cadence of human speech rising and falling, echoing off the rock walls. "Someone's down there," Ree said, already reaching for her radio. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the Jeep, walking to the edge of the canyon. The beam cut down into the darkness, illuminating the upper section of the rock wall but not reaching the bottom. The voice continued clearer now. It sounded like a man calling for help, awed up from the depths. "Por favor, Audi, help me. Please help me. Border Patrol," I shouted down into the canyon. "Where are you? Can you see my light?" The voice stopped. Silence for maybe 10 seconds, then it came again. Same words, same tone, same rhythm. "Ayúdame, por favor, ayúdame." I looked at Ree. She was on the radio calling it in, requesting backup. "We've got a possible distressed person in Devil's Canyon," she said, requesting additional units and medical support. The response came back broken and staticky. We were in one of those dead zones Ree had mentioned where the terrain interfered with transmission. She tried again, switching channels, boosting the power. Same result. Too much static, too much interference. "We need to go down there," I said. "If someone's injured, we can't wait for backup." Ree nodded, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. We both knew the stories, both knew about the older agents who refused to descend into the canyon. But we also both knew our job. If someone was down there calling for help, we had a duty to respond. We geared up with flashlights, first aid kit, water and rope in case we needed to do any climbing. The descent into Devil's Canyon wasn't technically difficult, just steep. There's a trail of sorts, really, more of a game trail that switchbacks down the western wall. It takes about 20 minutes to reach the bottom if you're careful. As we descended, the voice continued, always the same words, the same rhythm. "Audi, por favor, Audi." It seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of us, deeper in the canyon. The echo made it hard to pinpoint exactly where, but it was definitely south of our position, maybe a quarter-mile down canyon. "That's weird," Ree said as we reached the canyon floor. "He's not varying what he's saying, just the same phrase over and over." She was right. Most people in distress don't repeat the exact same words in the exact same tone. They vary their calls, try different languages if they're bilingual, change volume and emphasis. This was like listening to a recording, perfectly consistent. "Maybe he's delirious," I suggested. "Dehydrated, injured. Sometimes people get stuck in verbal loops when they're in shock." "Maybe." We moved south along the canyon floor, our flashlights playing across the rocks and the narrow strip of ground between the walls. The voice continued ahead of us, always at the same distance, never getting closer or farther away despite our movement. After about 10 minutes of walking, Ree stopped. "Lane, I don't think we're getting any closer. I know it's the acoustics. Sound is bouncing around, making it hard to judge distance." "No, I mean we should be right on top of whoever's calling out by now. We've covered at least a 4 mile, but it still sounds the same distance away." I listened. She was right. The voice had the same quality, the same volume as when we'd first heard it from the rim. We should have either found the source by now or heard it getting louder as we approached. "Border Patrol," I called out again. "We're coming to help you. Can you hear me? Can you see our lights?" The voice responded immediately. Odd, same tone, same everything. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. "Let's keep moving," I said. "Maybe he's farther than we think." We continued south, following the voice. The canyon walls rose on either side of us, dark stone that swallowed our flashlight beams. Above, the strip of sky visible between the rims was thick with stars, but they gave no light. Down here it was just us and our lights, and that voice calling from the darkness. 20 minutes later, we still hadn't found the source. The voice continued with its mechanical consistency echoing through the canyon, never varying, never pausing longer than 10 seconds between repetitions. "This isn't right," Ree said. And I could hear fear creeping into her voice. "Lane, I think we should head back. Someone needs help. I don't think that's a person. I think it's something else." "Like what?" "I don't know, but people don't sound like that. People don't stay the same distance away no matter how far you walk toward them." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist we had a duty to keep searching, but she was making sense. Everything about this was wrong. The unchanging voice, the way we never seemed to get closer, the perfect repetition. This wasn't a person in distress. This was something else. "Okay," I said. "We head back, but I'm reporting this getting a full team out here tomorrow to search properly." We turned around and started retracing our path north. That's when the voice changed. It didn't change what it was saying. Still the same Spanish phrase, but the direction changed. It was behind us now, back where we'd just come from, as if the source had somehow gotten between us and our exit point. We both stopped walking. Ree grabbed my arm. "It moved," she whispered. Yeah, we stood there listening. The voice continued from behind us north of our position. "Ayúdame, por favor, ayúdame," slowly. I turned my flashlight to shine back the way we'd come. The beam illuminated the rocky floor, the canyon walls, empty space. No person, no source for the voice. "Let's move," I said, fast. We started walking quickly north, back toward the trail that would take us up to the rim. The voice stayed behind us, maintaining its distance, still calling out in that same mechanical rhythm. As we walked, I noticed something else. The canyon felt different. I couldn't explain how, couldn't point to any specific change, but something was wrong. The walls seemed closer, maybe, or the ground less even. Details I didn't remember from our descent. "Ree, are these the same rocks we passed on the way down?" She shone her light around. "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to landmarks. I don't remember that formation," I said, pointing at a large boulder that sat in the middle of the canyon floor. It was roughly cubic, maybe 6 ft on each side, dark stone that looked different from the surrounding rock. Neither do I, but maybe it was just dark. Maybe we missed it. We circled around the boulder and kept walking, behind us. The voice continued, odd ever odd. 5 minutes later, we found another boulder. Same size, same shape, same dark stone. It was positioned in almost the exact center of the canyon floor, just like the first one. "That's the same rock," Ree said. "Can't be. We've been walking north the whole time. We haven't turned around. Then explain why we're seeing the same boulder twice." I couldn't unless we'd somehow gotten turned around in the darkness, walked in a circle without realizing it. But I had my compass, had been checking our heading regularly. We were moving north toward the rim, toward our exit point. Except we weren't getting any closer to the trail. "We need to climb out," I said, looking at the canyon walls. They were steep, but not impossible. If we couldn't find the trail, we could make our own way up. "Are you serious? Those walls are nearly vertical, and we have rope. We can do this, Ree. We just need to get to the rim." She looked up at the towering rock walls, then back at me. Okay, let's try." We moved to the western wall and started looking for a route. The rock was sandstone, layered and fractured with enough handholds and ledges to make climbing feasible. I tied the rope around my waist and started up, testing each hold before committing my weight to it. I made it about 20 ft before the Jeep's lights went out. Not a gradual dimming or flickering, just instant darkness. One moment I could see our vehicle up on the rim, headlights illuminating the opposite wall. The next moment, nothing. "Lane," Ree called from below, "I see it. Just hold on." I climbed back down, trying to stay calm, trying not to think about what it meant that our vehicle's lights had just died for no reason. Battery failure, maybe, or someone had turned them off. But there was no one up there. We would have seen them, would have heard them. When I reached the canyon floor, Ree was already on her radio trying to raise anyone on any frequency. All she got was static. "We need to move," I said. "Now forget finding the trail, forget climbing. We just walk north until we hit the end of the canyon and we get out however we can." "The voice, I don't care about the voice, move." We started north again, walking fast, almost jogging. Behind us, the voice continued its call. "Odd por favor." Odd, and then ahead of us another voice answered. Same words, same tone, same mechanical rhythm. But this one was coming from the north, from the direction we were heading. We stopped, looked at each other. Behind us, one voice calling. Ahead of us, another voice responding. Both saying the same thing, both perfectly synchronized. "Audi pavor, Audi por favor ayúdame." The voices overlapped, now creating a stereo effect that filled the canyon. And as they did, I realized something. They weren't speaking Spanish. The sounds were similar. The rhythm was right. But the words themselves were wrong, distorted, like someone trying to imitate human speech without quite understanding how it worked. "We need to climb," Ree said, her voice shaking. "Now, Lane, we need to get out of here now." She was right. Whatever was happening, whatever was making those sounds, we needed to get away from it. We moved to the western wall again, and I started climbing faster this time, not worrying about safety or caution. Just up away from the canyon floor and those wrong voices. Ree followed, climbing right below me. I could hear her breathing hard, could hear small rocks falling as she scrambled for holds above us, maybe 50 FT to the rim. Below us. Those voices continuing their call, 30 FT 20. My hands were scraped and bleeding from the rough rock. My shoulders burned from the effort, but we were going to make it. We were going to get out. That's when the lights came back on. The Jeep's headlights blazed to life, blindingly bright after the darkness. But they weren't pointed the same direction as before. They'd been facing south, illuminating the canyon wall opposite our position. Now they were pointed down straight into the canyon, shining directly on us. In that light, I could see Ree clearly below me, could see the rocks we were climbing, could see the canyon floor we were escaping from, and I could see the figures. There were 5 of them standing in a loose group at the base of the wall we were climbing. They were human-shaped, roughly the right height, the right general proportions. But something about them was wrong. The way they stood was too still, too perfect. No small movements, no shifting weight, no breathing motion, just absolutely motionless statues of people. And they were all looking up at us. I couldn't see faces. The headlight was behind them, putting them in silhouette, but I could see their heads tilted back, could see those motionless forms oriented toward our position on the wall. One of them raised its hand slowly, mechanically, like a mannequin being posed. It pointed up at us, and as it did, all 5 voices spoke in perfect unison. "Audivore Ayad, climb," I gasped to Ree. "Don't look down, just climb." We scrambled up the last 20 FT, hands and feet finding holds through pure desperation. I pulled myself over the rim and immediately reached back to help Ree. She grabbed my hand and I hauled her up, both of us collapsing on the rocky ground at the canyon's edge. The Jeep was right where we'd left it, maybe 20 FT away. Engine off, lights still blazing down into the canyon. I could see those 5 figures in the headlight beams, still standing at the base of the wall, still looking up, still pointing. "Get in the Jeep," I said. We ran for it, not looking back. I yanked open the driver's door and jumped in, re-diving into the passenger seat beside me. I jammed my key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. The engine didn't even try to turn over, didn't click or grind or make any sound at all, just silence. "Come on," I muttered, trying again. Still nothing. "Lane," Ree said, her voice barely audible. "The headlights." I looked. The lights were still on, still pointing down into the canyon, but there was nothing in the beams now. The 5 figures were gone, just empty rock and shadow. Then the lights went out again. In the darkness that followed, I tried the ignition once more. This time, the engine started immediately, roaring to life like it had never been dead. I didn't wait. I threw the Jeep into gear and hit the gas. Not bothering with headlights, just driving by feel and instinct. Getting away from the canyon rim as fast as the rough terrain would allow. About half a mile north, I finally turned on the headlights and slowed down. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Beside me, Ree was crying softly, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "What were those things?" she asked. "I don't know. They looked like people, I know, but they weren't people." "No," I agreed, "they weren't." We drove back to the station in silence. When we got there, I wrote up an incident report, tried to explain what had happened in language that wouldn't sound insane. Equipment malfunction, possible heat exhaustion, disorientation, and difficult terrain. I mentioned hearing calls for help that we couldn't locate. Mentioned the Jeep's electrical issues, didn't mention the figures, didn't mention the way the voices had synchronized, didn't mention that feeling of wrongness that still hadn't left me. Refiled a similar report. We both recommended that Devil's Canyon be flagged for further investigation. Maybe get some technical team out there to check for geological anomalies or electromagnetic interference that might explain what we'd experienced. The recommendation was noted and ignored. Devil's Canyon remained on our patrol route, and we were told to continue monitoring it as normal. But I didn't go back. Found excuses, rearranged my patrol pattern, made sure I was always assigned to other parts of the sector. Ree did the same. We didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge what we were doing, but we both stayed away from that canyon. 3 other agents weren't so cautious, or maybe they just didn't believe the stories. Either way, a week after our experience, 2 agents descended into Devil's Canyon on a night patrol. They reported hearing voices calling for help. They went down to investigate. One of them came back. His name was Berilles, a tracker who'd been with Border Patrol for 5 years. Waken had the kind of skills you only get from growing up in rough country, could read tracks in solid rock, could tell you how long ago someone had passed through an area just by looking at disturbed pebbles. When he climbed out of that canyon at 4:00 a.m., 3 hours after he and his partner had descended, he was alone. His uniform was torn, his hands were bleeding, and he couldn't or wouldn't explain what had happened to his partner. The search teams went down at first light. They found the partner's gear, his radio, his flashlight, all arranged in a neat pile at the base of the western wall. But they didn't find him. No tracks leading away, no signs of a struggle, nothing. He was just gone. Waken was put on administrative leave pending investigation. I went to see him at his house 2 days later. He was sitting on his porch, staring at nothing, looking like he hadn't slept since he'd come out of that canyon. "What happened down there?" I asked. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "You've been down there, you know the voices. They don't want help, Lane. They're not calling for help." "Then what do they want? Company." He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "They want company. They're lonely down there in the dark. What are they? I don't know. People, maybe. People who went into that canyon and never came out. People who got lost in the dark in the echo and the wrong angles. People who are still walking down there, still calling out. Still looking for someone to show them the way. Your partner don't. His voice was sharp. Don't ask me about him. I don't want to talk about what I saw." But later, after a few more cigarettes and a lot of silence, he told me anyway. He said that they descended into the canyon following the same voice we'd heard, the same words, same mechanical rhythm. They'd walked for what felt like hours, never getting closer, the canyon somehow always leading them deeper. And then the lights on their Jeep had gone out. In the darkness that followed, his partner had started talking, not to Waken, but to the voices, responding to them like they were having a conversation. We had tried to stop him, tried to get him to focus on finding their way out, but his partner wouldn't listen. He kept responding to the voices, kept trying to locate them. And then he said he saw something, a light in the distance down at the far southern end of the canyon. He was going to check it out, he'd said, going to see if that was where the voices were coming from. Waken had told him to wait, to stay together, but his partner had walked into the darkness following that light. And the last thing Waken heard from him was his voice joining with the others in the canyon. Audivore, Ayudame, same words, same tone, same mechanical rhythm. Waken had run, then climbed the wall in total darkness, tearing his hands on the rock, not caring about anything except getting out. And when he'd pulled himself over the rim, when he'd looked back down, he'd seen lights in the canyon. Not the Jeep's headlights, different lights, pale and moving like flashlights being carried by people walking through the darkness. 6 lights, 6 figures walking in a line, and somehow he'd known that one of those lights was his partner. One of those figures was the man he'd gone into the canyon with. "They're still down there," Watkins said, crushing out his cigarette. "All of them. Everyone who's ever gone into that canyon and not come out. They're walking in the dark, calling for help, hoping someone will come find them. And when someone does, when someone comes down there to rescue them, they make them stay. Add them to the group. Add another voice to the chorus. That's insane. Yeah, he looked at me, but I'm right. You've been down there, you've heard them. I wanted to argue. Wanted to say it was grief talking or shock or some kind of psychological break. But I couldn't because he was right. I had heard them. I had seen those figures standing at the base of the wall pointing up at us. Wakin was right, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. They shut down patrols of Devil's Canyon after that, called it a safety issue, said the terrain was too dangerous for routine patrol work. Anyone assigned to Sector 14 now is briefed that the canyon is off limits except for specific operational needs, but I still hear the stories. Other agents who work the area who patrol the rim at night, they say they hear voices coming from the canyon. Multiple voices now, more than there used to be, all calling out in that same mechanical rhythm. Ayud, por favor, ayúdame. And sometimes late at night, you can see lights down there, pale and moving like flashlights carried by people walking through the darkness. 6 lights when said, but the agents who watch now say they count more. 7, 8, sometimes 10 or more. Devil's Canyon is collecting them. Everyone who goes down there, everyone who tries to answer those calls for help, it takes them and makes them part of itself. Adds their voices to the chorus, adds their lights to that procession, walking endlessly through the dark. I'm leaving Border Patrol next month, taking a job with a security company in Phoenix indoors, climate-controlled, as far from the desert and the border and that canyon as I can get. But I know it doesn't matter because sometimes late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear it faint like it's coming from very far away, but unmistakable. Audivore. Odd. And I know that sooner or later that canyon is going to call me back. Going to pull me down into its darkness like it's pulled everyone else who's heard its voice. I just hope when it does I'm strong enough to resist. Strong enough not to descend into that darkness looking for the source of those calls. But I don't think I will be because I dream about it now. Dream about walking into Devil's Canyon at night, flashlight in hand, following those voices deeper and deeper. And in my dreams, I never come back out. I just join the others, walking endlessly through the dark, adding my voice to theirs, calling out for help that will never come. You learn certain rules working the border. Don't trust easy crossings because they're never as easy as they look. Don't assume someone running is guilty because sometimes they're just scared. And don't follow lights in the desert at night unless you know exactly what they are and where they're coming from. I'm Harlan Devo, 12 years with Border Patrol, and I've broken that last rule exactly once. Once was enough. I work Sector 8 in West Texas, where the border follows a stretch of desert so empty and hostile that most smugglers avoid it entirely. The ground is hard kitchai mixed with loose sand, dotted with yucca and Spanish dagger plants sharp enough to shred your clothes and skin. Water is scarce, shade is non-existent, and during summer the temperature regularly hits 115 degrees. It's the kind of place that kills people. Not dramatically, not with violence or spectacle, just slowly and efficiently. Dehydration, heat stroke, exposure. Every year we find bodies out there, people who thought they could make the crossing and learned too late they couldn't. Which is why when we spot a light in the desert at night, we respond. Because a light usually means someone is lost, someone is in trouble, someone needs help before the desert takes them. 3 nights ago, I was on patrol with Cade Merriweather, a rookie agent who transferred in from the California sector about 6 months back. Cade is young, eager, still has that sense of mission that years on the job tend to wear away. He takes the work seriously, maybe too seriously. The kind of guy who wants to save everyone, even the ones who can't be saved. We were about 2 hours into our shift, running a standard patrol along the fence line when Cade pointed out into the darkness to the north. "You see that?" I looked where he was pointing. There, maybe half a mile out, was a light, small, yellowish, moving slowly through the desert. It looked like a flashlight or maybe a lantern. Someone walking through the darkness. "Could be a crossing," I said, reaching for the radio. "Should we check it out?" "Yeah, but we call it in first. Get air support if they're available." I raised the operations center, reported the light, gave our coordinates. The dispatcher confirmed and said air support would be on station in 20 minutes. Helicopter from Fort Stockton with LIIR and spotlight. Pilot's name was Nora Gresham. I'd worked with her before. Solid pilot who knew the terrain. "Copy that," I said. "We're going to approach on foot, see if we can make contact." 10-4. "Be advised, we're getting unusual atmospheric readings for your area. Some kind of temperature inversion. Radio communication may be affected." "Understood." I hung up and looked at Cade. "We walk in slow, announce ourselves clearly, and we do not separate." "Got it, got it." We pulled the vehicle off to the side and started walking north toward the light. The desert at night has a quality of silence that's almost oppressive, like the darkness itself is muffling sound. Our boots on the hard pan seemed too loud, our breathing too obvious. The light continued moving ahead of us, steady and slow. As we got closer, I could see it better. Definitely a flashlight or lantern being carried at waist height by someone walking. The beam swung slightly with each step, the way a light does when someone's walking and not trying to conceal themselves. "Border Patrol," I called out. "We see your light. Please stop where you are and identify yourself." The light kept moving, didn't stop, didn't change direction, just continued its slow progress north. "They might not speak English," Cade said. I tried again in Spanish. "Petrila fronteresa dang identific," still no response. The light kept moving. "Maybe they can't hear us," Cade suggested. "Wind, distance, whatever." But there was no wind. The air was completely still, had been all night. One of those dead, calm desert nights where sound should carry for miles. We kept walking, closing the distance. The light was maybe 300 YD ahead now, still moving at that same steady pace. And as we got closer, I started noticing something odd. The light wasn't wobbling the way a handheld light should. It was perfectly smooth, perfectly level, like it was mounted on something. "Cade, you notice anything strange about that light?" "Yeah, too steady for someone carrying it, that's what I'm thinking." We slowed our approach, both of us getting cautious now. A steady light in the desert could mean a lot of things, and not all of them were benign. Could be a trap, smugglers trying to draw us in. Could be a decoy while the real crossing happens somewhere else. I pulled out my binoculars and tried to get a better look. In the darkness, all I could see was the light itself, a pale yellow glow that didn't illuminate anything around it. No silhouette of a person carrying it. No detail of what might be producing it, just the light itself floating through the darkness. "This doesn't feel right," I said. "Want to wait for air support?" I checked my watch. Nora should be on station in about 10 minutes. We could wait, let her use the flyer to see what we were dealing with. But if there was someone out there in distress, 10 minutes could matter. We keep going, I decided, but weapons ready and we stay alert. We continued north. The light stayed ahead of us, maintaining its distance. We were walking faster than it was moving. Should have been closing the gap, but somehow it stayed the same distance away. Like it was pacing us, adjusting its speed to match ours. That's when the wind stopped. I know that sounds strange because I'd already said there was no wind, but there's always some air movement in the desert, even on calm nights. The faint stirring of cooling air, the slight drift of thermal currents, it's subtle, barely noticeable, but it's there. Except now it wasn't. The air had gone absolutely still, not a breath of movement. And with that stillness came a pressure change, like being in a room when someone suddenly seals all the doors and windows. My ears popped. "You feel that?" Kate asked. Yeah, the light ahead of us stopped moving, just froze in place, hovering at the same height off the ground, perfectly still. I raised my flashlight and pointed it toward the light. My beam cut through the darkness, illuminating desert scrub and rocks and sand. But when it reached the place where the light should be, there was nothing there. My beam passed right through it like it didn't exist in physical space. What the hell? Cade breathed. I tried my radio. Operations, this is Devo. The light has stopped. We're approaching to investigate. Static filled the channel. Then underneath it, something else. A voice maybe too distorted to make out words. It sounded wrong, though, like the transmission was coming from very far away or passing through some kind of interference. Operations, do you copy? More static than a brief moment of clarity. Not the dispatcher's voice. Someone else, a woman speaking urgently. Don't follow the signal broke up again. Lost in static and that odd underwater quality that suggested serious interference. Did you hear that? I asked Cade. Yeah, couldn't make it out though. I tried again. Operations, you're breaking up. Say again your last transmission. The woman's voice came back clearer this time. Don't follow the light. Repeat, do not follow the light. Return to your vehicle. I recognize the voice now. It was Nora Gresham, our air support, but she shouldn't be on our frequency, should be on the aviation channel. And she shouldn't be telling us not to investigate the very thing we'd called her in to help with. Gresham, this is Devo. Why are you on this frequency? What's your position? I'm overhead. I can see you on LIR. There are 2 heat signatures where you are. You and your partner, but there's nothing in front of you. No third signature, no heat source for that light. It's not real, Heron. Get out of there. I looked at the light, still hanging motionless in the darkness ahead of us. Then I looked at Cade. His face and the glow of our flashlight showed the same confusion I was feeling. Nora, we can see the light. It's right there, maybe 200 YD ahead. I'm telling you, there's nothing there. My fur shows nothing but empty desert between you and the border. You need to turn around now. Why? What do you see? A long pause, static. Then her voice again, tight with something I'd never heard from her before. Fear. I don't know how to explain this. My FR is showing something, but it's wrong. There are heat signatures forming around your position. Lots of them all around you in a circle. But when I look with normal vision, I don't see anything. And the signatures themselves, they're not right. Not the right shape or temperature for people. I spun around, shining my flashlight in a circle. Empty desert, nothing moving, nothing visible except sand and scrub and rocks. I don't see anything down here. They're not visible on normal spectrum, only on thermal. And they're getting closer to you. You need to move now. I grabbed Cade's arm back to the vehicle, double time. We started walking quickly back the way we'd come, keeping our flashlights moving, scanning for any threats. Behind us, the light hadn't moved. It still hung in the air, perfectly still, perfectly silent. Nora's voice crackled over the radio again. The signatures are following you. They're maintaining their distance, but they're definitely tracking your movement. How many? I count 12. No, 15. They keep appearing like they're forming out of nothing. My skin crawled. We were walking through empty desert, seeing nothing, while overhead Nora was watching 15 thermal signatures circle us like wolves around prey. How far are we from the vehicle? About 400 Y. Keep moving. Don't stop. We picked up our pace, almost jogging now. The pressure in the air had increased, making it harder to breathe. And there was a sound now, faint but growing louder. A low humming almost below the threshold of hearing felt more than heard. It was coming from all around us, vibrating through the ground in the air. Nora, are you hearing this? Negative, I don't hear anything unusual, but the thermal signatures are moving faster. They're trying to cut you off from the vehicle. Can you get lower? Shine your spotlight on them. I can try. I heard the helicopter descending. Heard the change in rotor pitch as Nora brought it down. Then the spotlight came on. A brilliant white beam that lit up the desert like daylight. And in that light, for just a moment, I saw them. They weren't solid, not really, more like distortions in the air, heat shimmer made visible, roughly human-shaped but wrong, too tall, limbs too long, movements too fluid. They were surrounding us in a loose circle, maybe 30 FT away, and as the spotlight hit them, they seemed to recoil, pulling back from the light. Jesus Christ! Cade gasped. "Run," I said. We ran full sprint, not caring about the rough ground or the plants that tore at our clothes. Bar humming getting louder, more intense. Could feel the pressure building like the air itself was getting thicker. The spotlight followed us, keeping us lit. And in its beam, I could see our shadows. Multiple shadows, more than just the two of us, as if those things circling us were close enough now to cast shadows of their own, even though I still couldn't see them directly. Almost there, Nora's voice said over the radio. 100 yards. The vehicle's lights were visible ahead. Parking lights we'd left on. We were going to make it. That's when I heard Cade yell. I looked back and saw him on the ground having tripped over something. He was scrambling to get up, but one of those distortions was right next to him, closer than the others had got. In the spotlight beam, I could see it clearly now. Tall, impossibly thin, with arms that reached nearly to the ground, where its face should be. There was just a smooth blankness like heat shimmer over hot pavement. Cade moved. He got to his feet and ran, and I ran with him, both of us covering the last 50 yards in seconds. We reached the vehicle and threw ourselves inside, slamming the doors. I started the engine and hit the gas, not bothering with lights, just driving blind through the darkness, getting away from that place. The humming stopped. The pressure dropped. The air was suddenly normal again, and I could breathe. I drove for about 2 miles before I stopped, pulled over and looked back. Nora's helicopter was hovering over the area we just left, spotlight still on, illuminating empty desert. Gresham, do you still see them? Negative. They dispersed when you reached the vehicle. Whatever they were, they're gone now. I looked at Cade. He was pale, shaking, but unheard. You okay? What were those things? I don't know. My radio crackled. Dio, this is operations. We've been trying to raise you for the last 10 minutes. What's your status? I picked up the handset. Operations. We encountered unknown contacts at our last position. Air support can confirm. Returning to base. Say again. You encountered what? Unknown contacts. I'll file a full report when we get back. There was confusion in the dispatcher's voice. Questions I didn't want to answer over the radio. I told him we'd brief in person and signed off. Nora landed at the station about 20 minutes after we arrived. When she climbed out of the helicopter, her face was drawn, worried in a way I'd never seen her. What did you see on the fly? I asked. Heat signatures, 15, maybe 20. They appeared out of nowhere, formed a circle around you, then disappeared just as fast when you reached your vehicle. What's the thermal profile on a human? About 98. 6 degrees core temperature with extremities cooler, typically ranging from 85 to 95 degrees. And these signatures, she paused. They were cold, not cold, maybe 60 degrees, 55 in some areas, but they were still showing up as distinct signatures against the ambient desert temperature. That shouldn't be possible. Heat signatures are supposed to be warmer than their surroundings, not cooler. Could it be equipment malfunction? I ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. And besides, you saw them too, didn't you? When I hit them with the spotlight, I nodded. Distortions like heat shimmer, right? So it wasn't just my equipment. Something was out there. The three of us filed our reports. I stuck to observable facts. Unknown light source, unusual atmospheric conditions, possible thermal signatures on aerial surveillance. Didn't speculate, didn't try to explain what we couldn't explain. The reports went up the chain of command and came back with a note saying the incident would be investigated. A technical team was sent out the next day to check the area. They found nothing unusual. No tracks, no equipment, no signs of human activity, just empty desert. But they did find something else. About 200 YD north of where we'd seen the light, they found an old border patrol vehicle. A Jeep looked like it was from the 80s, half buried in sand. The doors were open. The interior was full of windy-blown dirt, and there was no sign of whoever had been driving it. They checked the vehicle ID number. It had been reported missing in 1989, 35 years ago. The assigned agent, a guy named Thomas Kendrick, had disappeared while on patrol. They'd searched for weeks, never found him or the vehicle. And now here it was, miles from where it should have been, sitting in the desert like it had been there all along. They found something else inside the Jeep. A flashlight, Old yellow plastic kind that runs on batteries. When they tested it, it still worked. The batteries were dead, but someone had left it switched to the on position. I drove out to see the wreck myself. Looked at that old Jeep sitting in the sand. Looked at the flashlight still gripped in the mount on the dashboard. And I thought about that light we'd followed, that steady yellow glow that had led us into the desert. I thought about the things Nora had seen on her cold signatures that shouldn't exist. Thought about how they'd circled us. How they'd waited until we were far from our vehicle before getting close. And I wondered if Thomas Kendrick had seen a light 235 years ago. If he'd followed it into the desert, walked farther and farther from his vehicle, following something that looked like a person in need of help. I wondered if he'd felt that pressure change, that stillness in the air, if he'd realized too late that what he was following wasn't real. I wondered if he was still out there somewhere, walking through the desert at night, following lights that led nowhere. The incident report recommended that agents exercise caution when approaching unknown light sources in remote areas, especially at night. It recommended waiting for air support before investigating. Recommended maintaining radio contact with operations at all times. It didn't mention what we'd seen in Nora's spotlight. Didn't mention cold heat signatures or distortions in the air. Didn't mention the feeling that something in that desert was hunting, using light as bait to draw people away from safety. Some things you can't put in an official report. Some things you just have to know about and remember. Cade requested a transfer 3 days later. Said he wanted to be closer to family, wanted to work a sector with more urban development. I didn't blame him. He'd only been out here 6 months and he'd already seen something that would stick with him forever. Me? I'm still here, still working Sector 8, still patrolling that same stretch of desert at night. But I don't follow lights anymore. I don't care if they look like flashlights or lanterns or distress signals. I report them. I mark their position. I call for air support. But I don't follow them because I know what they are now. I know they're not people in distress, not lost travelers, not smugglers or scouts or anything human. They're traps, lures, things that look like what you expect to see, things that trigger your training and your instinct to help. And when you follow them, when you walk away from your vehicle and your partner and your safety, they come for you. I don't know what they are. Don't know if they're ghosts or aliens or some natural phenomenon we don't understand. Don't know if they're intelligent or just operating on instinct like angler fish in the deep ocean using light to draw and prey. All I know is they're out there in the empty places, the dark places, the places where people go missing and are never found. They're waiting with their lights and their silence and their cold signatures that shouldn't exist. And sometimes late at night when I'm on patrol, I see them. A light in the distance, steady and yellow, moving through the darkness. And I note its position and I call it in. And I keep driving. And I don't look back because I know if I do, if I follow that light into the desert, I won't come back. I'll become like Thomas Kendrick, like all the others who followed lights they shouldn't have followed. I'll disappear into the darkness. And they'll find my vehicle months or years later, half buried in sand, door hanging open, flashlight still switched to on. And someone else will see my light. Someone else will follow it, thinking they're helping, thinking they're doing their job, and the desert will take them too. Last night, Nora called me. She'd been up on a routine patrol, scanning with her fly when she'd seen something that made her think of our encounter. "There are lights out there," she said. "Lots of them. 10, maybe 15, all moving through the desert in different directions. And when I check them on thermal, there's nothing there. Just cold spots like the ones I saw before. Where? All through Sector 8, but concentrated around the area where we found Kendrick's Jeep. Did you report it? What would I report? That I'm seeing lights that don't exist. Tracking cold signatures that shouldn't be possible. They'd ground me, Harren. They'd say my equipment is malfunctioning or I'm seeing things. So what are you going to do? Nothing. Just watch them, keep track of them, and hope nobody else is stupid enough to follow them. We hung up, and I sat there thinking about those lights, thinking about how many there were now, 15, where before there had been one, thinking about how they spread through the desert like a disease, multiplying, growing, waiting for people to find them. I think they're collecting, taking people who follow them, adding them to their number. Thomas Kendrick became one. Maybe others over the years, people who disappeared on patrol or while crossing, people who were never found. All of them out there now, walking through the desert with their lights, leading others to the same fate. And I think about that message Nora sent us. That warning that came over the radio. Don't follow the light. I think it was her. Not the Nora I know, but a future version. A Nora who'd made the mistake of following one of those lights and was trying to warn her past self. Trying to save herself from a fate she couldn't escape. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was someone else. Some other agent who disappeared into the desert and found a way to send one last message back. One last warning to the living. It doesn't matter really. The warning is the same either way. Don't follow the lights. No matter how real they look, no matter how much they seem like someone in need of help, no matter what your training tells you to do, don't follow them because the desert is patient. It will wait forever for you to make that mistake. It will use your compassion against you, your sense of duty, your need to help. And when you finally follow that light into the darkness, when you finally step away from your vehicle and your safety and everything that keeps you tethered to the real world, it will take you. And you'll become another light in the darkness, another cold signature on the flyer, another warning that no one will hear in time. We find them all the time. Abandoned structures in the desert, temporary shelters used by smugglers to stage operations or hold people waiting for transport. Most are just crude setups, tarps over wooden frames. Sometimes an old trailer or shed that's been there so long nobody remembers who built it. We raid them, document what we find, and move on. The desert reclaims them eventually. Sand and wind erasing all evidence they ever existed. But some leave marks that don't fade. I'm Elias Treadwell, 9 years with Border Patrol, currently working Sector 12 in southern Arizona. We've got about 40 mi of fence line and twice that much open desert to monitor. It's rough country, mountainous in parts with canyons and washes that make vehicle access nearly impossible. Most of our work is done on foot or with ATVs, and we coordinate closely with our K-9 units when we're tracking people through difficult terrain. 2 weeks ago, we got a tip about a safe house operating in the mountains about 8 mi north of the border. The information came from someone who'd been held there, managed to escape, and wanted to help us shut the operation down. They gave us coordinates, described the building as an old mining office from the 50s or 60s. Adobe construction, partially collapsed roof. Said there had been about 20 people held there when they escaped, mostly families from Central America, waiting for smugglers to move them north to Tucson. We planned the raid for early morning, 4:00 a.m., before the smugglers would be awake, but late enough that we'd have our full team in place. 6 agents, 2 K-9 units, and air support standing by in case anyone ran. I was team lead coordinating with Merritt Lockatch, one of our best K-9 handlers, and checking in with Griffin Selkirk, our watch commander. Back at the station, we approached on foot, no lights, using night vision to navigate. The terrain was steep, rocky, covered with mossquite and prickly pear. The kind of ground that makes noise matter how careful you are. Rocks shifting under your boots, branches catching on your gear. About 100 yards from the target location, I called a halt and glassed the building with my night vision. It was exactly where our informant said it would be, sitting in a small hollow between 2 ridges. Adobe walls, metal roof that had mostly caved in on the eastern side. No lights visible, no movement outside. Looks abandoned. Merritt whispered beside me. Her dog, a German shepherd named Kilo, sat quietly at her feet, ears forward, alert, but not indicating any sense yet. Could be sleeping, I said. Could have cleared out already. I radioed back to Selkirk at the station. We're in position. Building appears unoccupied, but we're proceeding with the raid as planned. Copy that, Treadwell. Air support is 15 minutes out if you need it. 10-4. I signaled the team to move in. We approached in a standard formation, covering angles, weapons ready. As we got closer, Kilo started showing interest, pulling slightly on his lead, nose working. "He's got something," Merritt said quietly. "Recent? Can't tell yet, but there's definitely human scent." We reached the building's perimeter. Up close, it looked worse than it had through the night vision. The walls were crumbling. The roof was gone in several places, and the door hung at an angle on broken hinges. Through the gaps, I could see the interior was dark, filled with debris and trash. "Border Patrol," I called out. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands visible." No response, no movement, just silence and that desert night stillness. I nodded to two of my agents and they moved to the door, one on each side. On my count, they pushed it open and we flooded in, flashlights cutting through the darkness, calling out commands in English and Spanish. The building was empty. We cleared each room systematically, checking corners and shadows, but there was no one there. The place had been used recently, though. We found blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers, all the evidence of people having stayed here, but no people. They must have cleared out when they heard us coming. One of my agents said, "Maybe, but something felt wrong. The informant had called us 6 hours ago, had said there were 20 people here." Even if the smugglers had been tipped off, moving 20 people through this terrain in the dark would leave tracks, would make noise, and Kilo was still indicating fresh scent, which meant people had been here recently. Very recently. "Merritt, how old is this scent?" She let Kilo work, watching his behavior. Minutes old, maybe an hour at most. Someone was definitely here tonight. I looked around the room we were standing in. It was maybe 20 ft square with a collapsed section of roof letting in starlight. The floor was dirt packed hard by years of use. Against one wall I could see a pile of blankets arranged like someone had been sleeping there. And in the corner I noticed something else. A battery-operated emergency light, the kind construction workers use, sitting on a piece of broken furniture. As I watched, it flickered once, twice, then stayed dark. "Anyone touch that light?" I asked. My team shook their heads. I walked over to it, keeping my flashlight on it. It was one of those LED work lights, yellow plastic housing, probably runs on D batteries. I picked it up and checked the switch. It was in the on position, but the light wasn't illuminating. Dead batteries probably, except it had just flickered. I'd seen it clearly twice in quick succession. I switched it to off, then back to on. Nothing happened. Dead batteries. Treadwell, one of my agents, called from the next room. "You need to see this." I walked through the doorway into what had probably been an office. This room was in better shape, roof mostly intact, one window with glass still in it. And on the wall, someone had drawn something. It was crude, done in charcoal or burnt wood, a symbol of some kind, circular with radiating lines like a sun or a star around it. Words in Spanish repeated over and over in different handwriting styles. The same phrase written maybe 20 times covering the wall. "No day's a key, don't leave us here." "What the hell is this?" the agent asked. I was about to answer when Merritt's voice came from the main room. "Guys, Kilo's acting weird." We went back to find the dog staring at the corner where I'd found the emergency light. He was rigid, tail down, hackles raised. The low growl in his throat was one I'd heard before when he'd cornered someone dangerous, someone who might fight. But there was nothing in that corner, just shadows and the emergency light I'd set down after checking it. "What's he seeing?" I asked Merritt. "I don't know." I've never seen him react like this to empty space. I pulled out my thermal camera, the one we used to detect heat signatures in dark buildings. I powered it on and pointed it at the corner Kilo was focused on. The screen showed a single heat signature, human-sized, roughly person-shaped, standing in the corner. Bright white and yellow on the thermal display indicating significant heat. Someone was there. "We've got a contact," I said, raising my weapon. "Border Patrol, show yourself." "Come out of the corner with your hands up." Nothing moved. The thermal signature remained stationary, but my eyes saw only empty space. I swept my flashlight across the corner, illuminating every shadow. Nothing. No person, no hiding place, just adobe wall and dirt floor. But the thermal camera didn't lie. Someone was standing right there. This doesn't make sense, I said, checking the camera again. The signature was still there, still showing human temperature. The thermal is showing a person, but there's no one there. Equipment malfunction. One of my agents suggested, can't be, look at this. I panned the camera around the room, showing the thermal signatures of my team members, all normal, all accurate. Then I pointed it back at the corner. The signature was still there, hadn't moved. Merritt tried calling to the person in Spanish, explained we could see them on thermal imaging, asked them to come out peacefully. No response. Kilo continued growling, continued staring at that empty corner. I made a decision. We're going to approach and make physical contact. 2 agents move in slowly. 2 of my team moved toward the corner. Weapons trained on the spot where the thermal showed a person. They reached the wall and found nothing. One of them waved his hand through the space where the signature should be, empty air. But on my thermal camera, I could see their hands pass through the bright white figure. Could see it standing there unmoving while my agents confirmed there was nothing physical in that location. This is wrong, Merritt said. This is really wrong. Elias, we should get out of here. She was right. Everything about this was wrong. The empty building that should have had 20 people in it. The writing on the wall pleading not to be left. The emergency light that flickered when it had dead batteries. And now this a thermal signature that didn't correspond to anything physical. Everyone out, I said, evacuating the structure. We filed out quickly, Kilo leading the way, eager to leave. Outside in the cool desert air, I could breathe easier, could think more clearly. I called Zelkirk on the radio. We've got an unusual situation here. Building is empty, but we're getting anomalous readings on thermal imaging, requesting technical support. What kind of anomalous readings? Heat signature showing a person in the structure, but no physical body. I've got 2 agents who just confirmed there's nothing there, but the thermal is clear. Long pause on the radio. Say again, Treadwell. You're seeing what I explained it again, trying to sound professional, trying not to acknowledge how crazy it sounded. Selkirk told me to hold the position. Said he'd send someone out to check our equipment. While we waited, I reviewed the footage from my thermal camera, watching the playback on its small screen. The signature was there the whole time, standing in that corner, never moving. I zoomed in on it and noticed something I hadn't seen in real time. The signature wasn't quite right. The temperature distribution was off. A normal person shows hotter in the core, cooler at the extremities. The signature was showing intense heat in specific spots. Clusters of brightness at what would be the chest, the head, and the hands, like there were multiple heat sources inside one body. Merritt, look at this. She leaned over to see the screen. That's not a normal heat pattern. No, it's not. Kilo barked suddenly, sharp and urgent. We both turned to see him staring at the building, body rigid again, and in the windows I could see that emergency light. It was on, flickering, but definitely illuminating, casting a yellow glow from inside the building. I turned that off, I said. I switched it to the off position. Maybe the switch is broken, Merritt suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. I raised my thermal camera and pointed it at the building. The signature was still there, still in the same corner, but now there were more of them. I counted 5, then 8, then 12, all roughly human-shaped, all showing that same abnormal heat pattern, all standing perfectly still, all facing the door we just exited through. Guys, I said quietly, we need to back up now. We moved back from the building, keeping our weapons trained on it, watching those thermal signatures crowd the interior. The emergency light continued to flicker on and off, like it was sending a signal. My radio crackled. Treadwell, this is air support. We're on station overhead. Do you need assistance? I looked up and could see the helicopter's lights maybe 1,000 FT above us. Negative on immediate assistance, but can you give me a thermal scan of the structure from your position? Stand by. 30 seconds later, the pilot came back. Treadwell, I'm showing multiple heat signatures inside the building. Looks like at least 15, maybe 20. They're all stationary, all oriented toward your position. Can you see them with normal vision? Negative. Building appears dark and empty on visual, only showing on thermal, 20 signatures. The same number of people our informant had said were being held in this safe house. 20 people who should have been here but weren't. 20 thermal signatures with no physical bodies. What's your recommendation? I asked the pilot. From what I'm seeing, this looks like some kind of technical malfunction. Thermal cameras can produce false readings under certain atmospheric conditions, but I've never seen a false reading that mimics human shapes this accurately. And I've definitely never seen this many false readings at once. I was about to respond when one of the thermal signatures moved. It stepped forward away from the group and approached the doorway. I could see it clearly on my camera, walking with a normal human gait, its heat pattern shifting as it moved. The emergency light flickered faster, more urgently. "It's coming out," Merritt said, her voice tight. We all trained our weapons on the doorway. The thermal signature reached it, paused, and then stepped through into the open air. I could see it on the thermal camera, standing just outside the building, maybe 20 FT from our position. But with my eyes, with normal vision, I saw nothing. Just empty space between us and the doorway. "Border Patrol," I called out. "We can see you on thermal imaging. Identify yourself." The signature didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there facing us. And as I watched on my camera, it raised its arms. Slowly, deliberately, it extended them toward us in a gesture that looked like pleading, like begging. And I heard it not with my ears, but somewhere deeper. A voice, or maybe many voices, speaking as one. "Help us, please don't leave us here." The same words from the wall, the same plea, but now spoken directly into my mind, bypassing sound entirely. "Did you hear that?" I asked my team. They all nodded, faces pale in the starlight. They'd heard it too, all of us had. The signature on my camera took another step forward. Behind it, the others were emerging from the building, one by one, filing out into the desert. I counted them as they appeared on my thermal display. 15, 18, 20. All of them raising their arms in that same pleading gesture. All of them facing us. "Help us, please, don't leave us here." The voices were louder now, more insistent, and with them came a pressure like the air itself was pushing against us, trying to hold us in place. "We're leaving," I said to my team. "Now back to the vehicles." We started moving, backing away from the building and those thermal signatures that kept advancing. Kilo was pulling hard on his lead, desperate to run. Merritt let him have more line, and he practically dragged her up the slope. As we climbed, I kept my thermal camera pointed back at the building. The signatures weren't following us anymore. They'd stopped at the perimeter of the hollow, standing in a line, arms still raised, still pleading, "Help us. Please don't leave us here." We reached our vehicles, and I called Selkirk on the radio. "We're evacuating the area. Multiple unknown contacts showing on thermal, but not visible. Requesting you close access to this location pending further investigation." "Copy that. Are you and your team safe?" "Affirmative. We're clear of the structure and heading back to station." We drove in silence, nobody wanting to talk about what we just experienced. When we got back to station, we found Selkirk waiting with a technical specialist from our equipment division. They tested my thermal camera. It functioned perfectly. No malfunctions, no false readings. When they reviewed the footage, they saw the same things I'd seen. 20 human-shaped heat signatures with abnormal temperature patterns standing in and around an abandoned building. I don't have an explanation for this. The specialist said the camera is working correctly. If it recorded these signatures, then they were there. Something was producing heat in those locations. Something organized enough to mimic human shapes, but we couldn't see them. I said with our eyes, with flashlights, there was nothing there. I know and I can't explain that, but thermal imaging detects infrared radiation. It's measuring actual heat being emitted. Whatever was producing these signatures, it was real enough to radiate in the thermal spectrum, even if it wasn't visible in the visual spectrum. They sent a technical team out the next day to investigate the building. They found the emergency light, tested it. Dead batteries wouldn't turn on no matter what they did. They found the writing on the wall, photographed it. noted the repetition of that same phrase, and they checked the building with multiple thermal cameras. All of them showed the same thing. Heat signatures, roughly 20 of them still inside the structure, still stationary, still showing that abnormal temperature pattern. One of the technicians tried to take temperature readings with a laser thermometer, pointing it at the locations where thermal cameras showed heat signatures. The readings came back normal. Ambient air temperature, no heat source detected. The heat they're showing on thermal doesn't exist, the technician reported. It's like they're projecting a thermal signature without actually producing heat. I've never seen anything like it. They tried communicating with the signatures, called out to them, asked questions in English and Spanish. No response. The signatures just stood there motionless, radiating their impossible heat. Finally, one of the technicians had an idea. He brought a regular visual camera and set it up on a tripod, pointing at one of the thermal signatures. Then he took a long exposure photograph, letting the camera collect light for 30 seconds. When he reviewed the image, there was something there. Not a person, not exactly, more like a distortion in the space. A spot where the starlight seemed to bend wrong, where the darkness seemed deeper than it should be. And in the center of that distortion, barely visible, was a face, not a normal face. The proportions were wrong. Features too sharp, eyes too large. It looked like someone had tried to remember what a human face looked like and gotten most of the details right, but missed some crucial element that separated uncanny from real. And it was looking at the camera. Looking with an expression that might have been sadness or might have been hunger, something that needed, something that wanted, something that had been waiting in that abandoned building for a very long time. They took more photographs. Every thermal signature showed the same thing in long exposure. A distortion, a wrongness in space, and at its center, a face that almost looked human. The building was officially marked as structurally unsafe and closed to all personnel. We put up warning signs, flagged it in our database, made sure no one would accidentally wander in there looking for shelter. But the thermal signatures remain. Every time we fly over in a helicopter with fur, every time someone points a thermal camera in that direction, they're there, 20 of them standing in and around that building, radiating impossible heat. And sometimes on quiet nights, people report hearing voices coming from that direction. The same plea carried on the desert wind. Help us. Please don't leave us here. Our informant, the one who told us about the safe house, the one who'd said there were 20 people being held there. We tried to contact them for a follow-up interview. We had questions about who exactly had been there, about when they'd escaped, about what they might have seen. But when we called the number they'd given us, it was disconnected. When we checked the address, it didn't exist. The informant had given us fake contact information. Or maybe they'd given us real information and then disappeared, the way people sometimes do in this work. We checked our records for any reports of missing persons from that area. Anyone who might have been held in that safe house and never made it out. We found 17 cases over the past 20 years. People who'd crossed the border and vanished somewhere in the mountains. People whose families had reported them missing but who were never found. 17 confirmed cases. And we were seeing 20 thermal signatures. I think about those 3 unaccounted signatures sometimes. Wonder if there are people we don't have records for, people whose disappearances were never reported. Or wonder if there are people who haven't disappeared yet. People who are still out there but whose fate is already written, already waiting in that building. I think about that emergency light flickering on and off with dead batteries. About those faces in the long exposure photographs, almost human but not quite. About that plea echoing in my head, those voices asking not to be left behind. And I think about our informant who told us there were 20 people in that building, who gave us exact coordinates but fake contact information, who sent us to a place where 20 thermal signatures waited but no physical bodies existed. I think they knew. Somehow they knew what was in that building, and they wanted us to know too, wanted us to see it, to document it, to acknowledge that something was there. Because I think those 20 thermal signatures were people once. Real people who crossed the border looking for a better life and got caught by smugglers who held them in that building. People who waited for transport that never came, who were abandoned in the desert and left to die. And I think some part of them is still there, still waiting, still radiating the heat of living bodies, even though those bodies are long gone, still pleading not to be left behind. Even though it's far too late for rescue, the writing on the wall said it plainly. No, Deja, don't leave us here. But we did leave them. Someone did, left them in that building in the mountains, left them to the desert and the heat and the slow death of abandonment. And now they're trapped there, caught between the living world and wherever people go when they die. Visible only to technology, audible only to those who get close enough to hear their plea. Forever waiting in that abandoned safe house. Forever asking for help that will never come. Sometimes I drive out toward those mountains at night and look in that direction. I can't see the building from the road. Can't see any lights or movement, but I know they're there. 20 thermal signatures standing in the darkness, raising their arms in an endless gesture of pleading. Help us. Please don't leave us here. I'm sorry. I think the words every time, even though I know they can't hear me, even though I know there's nothing I can do for them now. I'm sorry we couldn't save you. I'm sorry you were abandoned. I'm sorry you're still there, still waiting, still pleading. I'm sorry we have to leave you here because that's the truth of it. We can't help them. Whatever they are now, whether they're ghosts or echoes or something else entirely, they're beyond our help. They're trapped in that building, trapped in that moment of abandonment. And no amount of investigation or documentation or sorrow is going to set them free. All we can do is mark the location, warn others away, and try not to think too much about what we saw there. Try not to hear those voices in the quiet hours of the night. Try not to imagine what it feels like to be left behind in an abandoned building in the desert, calling for help that never comes, feeling the heat drain from your body while your thermal signature remains. A ghost of life in a shell of death. Try not to think about the fact that there are probably other buildings like this. Other places where people were left to die, other locations where thermal cameras would show signatures that shouldn't exist. Try not to wonder how many voices are calling out in the desert. How many pleas for help are echoing through empty structures unheard and unanswered. Try not to but fail. Because once you've seen it, once you've heard those voices and seen those faces in the long exposure photographs, you can't unknow it. Can't unfail that moment when the impossible becomes real. When the dead refuse to stay quiet. Last week, we got another tip. Another abandoned safe house, different location, same story. People being held, waiting for transport. The informant gave us coordinates and then disconnected their phone. Selkirk asked if I wanted to lead the raid. I said no. Recommended they send someone else, someone who hasn't been to the first location, someone who doesn't know what to look for. Because I think if I go to another one of these places, if I point my thermal camera into another abandoned building, I'm going to see them again. Those signatures with their impossible heat, their wrong faces, their endless pleading. And I don't know if I can handle seeing it twice. Don't know if I can walk away from another group of people or whatever they are now, left behind in the desert, calling for help that will never come. So I stay away. I patrol other parts of the sector. I respond to other calls. And I try not to think about that building in the mountains where 20 thermal signatures stand in the darkness, raising their arms, pleading not to be left. Try not to, but fail because they're still there, still waiting, still radiating their impossible heat into the cold desert night. And they always will be, I think, for as long as that building stands. For as long as thermal cameras exist to detect them, they'll be there trapped in the moment of their abandonment, forever asking for help. Forever being left behind. Help us. Please don't leave us here. I'm sorry. I think again, knowing it changes nothing. Knowing they can't hear me. Knowing they're beyond help. I'm sorry, but sorry doesn't save anyone. Sorry doesn't change the past. Sorry doesn't free thermal signatures from abandoned buildings. Sorry is just another voice in the desert calling out to no one, echoing into darkness, fading into silence.